Welcome back to the Flip Side of Death podcast. I'm your host, Lynn Stone, and today is going to be a follow-on from last week, talking about Widow Chronicles. And so last week we talked about grief, and timelines, and what to do, what not to do. And so we'll continue with the Widow Chronicles today. And I saw something on Facebook, and I saved it, and I thought it was a great topic because sometimes we have these ideas of what grief is, and we have ideas of how long grief should be managed, handled, whatever, right? And I think that this was a very informative post. So this was from a Facebook page called Until Death Do We Part. And I'm going to tag them in my Facebook post whenever I post this podcast. But they posted this poem and a story titled, "No One Warned Me About the Secondary Losses." So I'll read what they wrote because it's just fantastic. And then I'll show you the image that they had with it. It says, "When someone dies, we expect to grieve them. What we don't expect are the dozens, sometimes hundreds, of smaller losses that quietly follow. No one warned me that I would also grieve, having no one to share ordinary moments with, losing the person who knew my history better than anyone else, making every decision alone. Holidays that would never feel the same, inside jokes that no one else would understand, the future we had planned together, the sound of hearing my name spoken in their voice, the loss of feeling like a part of a couple, the person I used to be before grief changed me. These are called secondary losses, and they can be just as painful as the primary loss itself. They're often invisible to everyone else. Friends see the funeral is over and assume the hardest part has passed, but secondary losses keep unfolding, weeks later, months later, even years later. Each new milestone, holiday, life event, or ordinary Tuesday can uncover another loss you never imagined you'd have to grieve. If you've ever wondered why your grief seems to keep changing, or why you're suddenly devastated by something that seems small, you're not grieving too much. You're discovering another piece of what was lost. And that's a normal part of loving someone deeply. Be patient with yourself. Grief isn't just learning to live without the person. It's learning to live with all the losses their absence created." So that was just so... it's the truth. I mean, just 100% spot on. And I just couldn't say it any better than how they said it. And so if you're watching on YouTube, you will see that I'm showing you a picture. And this picture is a tree that has a lot of roots. And on the tree, engraved into the tree, it says the death, and then a heart. And then underneath the ground, around the roots, it says from left to right, it says identity, future plans, financial security, traditions, daily routine, shared dreams, sense of home, family roles, friendships, confidence, intimacy. What we see is only part of the grief. But we don't just grieve one loss. We grieve all the roots connected to it. So that is just such a powerful image. And if you've never lost anyone in your life, or if you have and it's been kind of a distant connection, and you just don't understand what Aunt Sally's problem is, why is it taking her so long to get over the passing of Uncle Bob, right? This is why. Because you just can't fathom the depth of grieving that a person does whenever they lose their person. And it's so difficult to explain to somebody because I just read the story to you and I just listed off all of these different things to you, and you're probably thinking, okay, that really wasn't that much. But I can tell you, when you're going through it, it's everything. And as a widow reading this list, it's like, yeah, I mean, this list completely hits home, because when you're with a person, you're with your significant other, that's what you do. you dream, you plan, you have ideas, you talk about all these things that you want to do. And now, don't get me wrong, not all relationships are rosy. I get that. And so I want to acknowledge that, because for some people, whenever their person dies, sometimes it's a relief. And then what they feel is guilt because they feel relieved that that person is no longer here. But what they experienced while that person was here was pain and resentment and fear and all sorts of negative emotions that are typically associated with those types of relationships. So if you are experiencing that, it's okay to feel that way. Some people feel guilty for feeling okay about their person passing away. Of course, they miss their person, but what they grieve isn't the person that they were when they passed. They grieve the person that they had expected them to be, what they had imagined them to be. And so for those people who their spouses might have been alcoholics, or they were drug addicts, or regardless of what the addiction was, you go into a relationship expecting one thing, and then when it doesn't turn out the way you expect, it's disappointing. And so we will stick with those people and we'll go through life and try to make things better. And you hear people all the time saying, well, maybe if I do this, maybe they'll stop. And they start trying to own that person's behavior and thinking that it's on them, that if they do this thing, they can fix them, and having that fixed mentality. And listen, I was one of those people too, okay? And my husband was an alcoholic. And honestly, I probably enabled him a little bit. But my thought process was that if he has one, maybe that'll just calm him down, and maybe we can go do something else, we can focus on something else, and that will make things better. And sometimes it did, most times it didn't. And I tried everything. We talked about the financial aspect, we talked about the health aspect, we talked about the impact on the kids, talked about the impact on me, the impact on himself, the impact on his family. It didn't matter, because the addiction was so strong that it was just there. Now, that was not the reason why he passed away, but it is something that I do think about occasionally, and I don't look at myself as a victim. So this is really the first time I've kind of really acknowledged that this was a thing that he had, because what I grieve, along with everything else, I was grieving the person that I knew he could be, the person that he was at one point before the drinking took over. And I know that the drinking was just a medication. It was just a Band-Aid for whatever things were happening inside of him emotionally and internally, that he was just trying to continue to keep down. And I think I had shared before that he was former military, and he absolutely refused, just would not go to the VA for assistance, absolutely refused to do it. And I had begged him to do it. And he said, no, that's for people who are missing arms and legs. And that's not me. And it's like, but yes, the VA is for those people who went to war, they saw traumatic things, they experienced traumatic things, and now they've come back to reintegrate into society, and they struggle. And he struggled. And there were certain triggers that he had that would launch him off into outer space sometimes. And the alcohol calmed the nerves. The alcohol kind of numbed the pain that he was feeling, and he would just drink until he didn't feel it anymore. And of course, if anyone that drinks a lot, and really anything, you start with a little bit and it numbs. Well, the more you get your body used to it, the more accustomed your body is to having it, the more you need in order to get the numbness. That's any addiction. So that was him. But I've really felt like this was important to share with people, because I don't think, when you look at people that who have lost someone in their life, honestly, you think about the obvious, right? The obvious thing is that they're missing their person. But unless you've been through it, you don't know that they miss that intimacy. And it doesn't always have to be about sex, okay? I'm talking just that physical interaction that you have with someone that holding hands, getting a back rub, kissing somebody, hugging somebody. That's the intimacy that a person is missing. And you just don't realize how much you did that or didn't do that whenever they're not there. So that's one of the big ones. Your confidence. Oh my goodness. I'm just kind of reading off this image because each one of those is so true. So I'm just going to talk through them a little bit. Your confidence suffers because when your person dies, a piece of you is gone. And so you're trying to figure out who you are, what you believe, what you want to do with yourself. If you're able to do things by yourself, because maybe your person did those things and now you don't feel like you're able to do those things, to take those things on. That's where the confidence level comes in. And being home by yourself, maybe your husband was the protector and now they're not here. So now you feel vulnerable. So confidence isn't just about the way they perceive themselves or the way that they present themselves. It's also about acknowledging the vulnerability that comes along with the loss. So that is a big one that a lot of people just don't even consider. They think about, oh, well, she's there by herself. Maybe she's scared, but there's a little bit more to that. Yeah, the other one on this page was about friendships. Death is uncomfortable for people to talk about. They're afraid that they're going to make you cry. They're afraid to say the person's name. They're afraid to bring it up. It's uncomfortable for them because they don't know what to do if you start crying. It's awkward. So I know a lot of people who are friends with couples. And, when you're a couple, friends with couples, and you all go out and do things, that's fantastic. But when your person dies and then you're like the third wheel or the fifth wheel or whatever odd number you are, and then it's just uncomfortable and it's awkward because they don't want to make you feel bad, but then they also don't want to hinder themselves around you. So what happens is they wind up just not inviting you. And so that circle, it is definitely a secondary loss in that what your social life was like with your person significantly changes. And not only is it that your friends stop inviting you, sometimes you stop accepting the invites because you don't want to go. This kind of linked back into that confidence thing. I don't want to go because they don't want to talk to me. I don't want to make them awkward. I don't want to feel awkward. So they'll just deny the invitation. And then what happens is people will just stop inviting you. And that can be a little painful because when you realize that is what's happening, it's kind of a slap in the face. And then, of course, for those that are a little self-aware, they look back and like, oh yeah, well, they did invite me and I turned them down. But, I wish they would keep inviting me and maybe I'll change my mind. But some people just don't have the patience for that or the understanding for that. So if you are someone that has a friend who has experienced a loss and you've invited them to come do things and they keep turning you down, don't give up on them. Give them some time and then try it again. And as time goes by, things change. Our feelings change, our perception changes, our confidence level changes. And so they've said no this time, but they might say yes the next time. So don't just completely cut ties with them. You just understand that they're going through a patch and they need a little bit of time and try again next time. This also plays into family roles, which was one of the ones on the list. When your person dies, your role in the family can change. Now, I was very fortunate that my husband's family was very accepting to me and they welcomed me with open arms before he'd passed, and after he passed, they were very, very supportive of us. So I cannot say enough about how good they treated me and continue to treat me. But that's not the same story for everybody. A lot of times, depending on the circumstances of a person's passing, the surviving spouse gets blamed. The in-laws blame the spouse. The kids blame the spouse. The friends blame the spouse, whether or not they had anything to do with it. And, interestingly, this happened to me. I had shared before that he had 3 kids and we had a daughter together. And his second child made this wild accusation that I had killed their dad. My stepdaughter had never been here. She had never been in this space and never seen anything. Like, she never came to visit us in this space. So I don't know where it came from. But she made this wild accusation, and she manipulated my younger stepson. They tried to tell my older stepson that this is what happened, and he said, "You guys are full of it. That's absolutely not what happened. You need to stop." And so, I mean, it's wild. Now, I still have a great relationship with both of my stepsons. My stepdaughter hasn't talked to me since I refused to give her one of my husband's items. But, and that's fine. Whatever. But that's what I mean, though. People like will come up with wild stories, just off the wall stories about assumptions about what happened or whatever, and run with it. Honestly, I can tell you, I was so hurt and so angry that was what had been said about me, that was the conclusion that they had drawn from everything that had happened. And so I can certainly resonate and relate to these people who have similar situations happen where they've been blamed for their spouse's passing, had absolutely nothing to do with it, but they're the punching bag, if you will, the verbal punching bag. So the roles change. I mentioned earlier about the confidence and the vulnerability, the sense of home. When your person passes away, what makes your home feel like home is that person. And when they're not there, you feel lost and hollow. Like, there's no reason to, like, you just don't care. You lose your pride in your place and your space because your person's not there to enjoy it with you. And that might seem so silly, but that's just one of the factors that widows experience. I relate a lot of that to not wanting to pick stuff up, just kind of letting things just get out of control and get messy and dirty. They stop caring. And that is just a symptom of grief. And eventually it goes away, and then you just kind of pull yourself back together and work through it. But that is true, just this sense of peace, this sense of home, this sense of grounding in your person, in your body, in your soul. And of course, shared dreams. Whenever you're with someone, you do that. You do say, oh, when I get old or when I retire, I want to go see all of the 50 states in the US. Or I want to go to the beach and live, or I want to go live on some Caribbean island somewhere, whatever. You have these innocuous conversations with your spouse, and you talk and you dream and you build from there. And sometimes that just doesn't ever come to fruition. So I know for my husband, his dream was he wanted to go to Mount Rushmore. So I'm thinking, okay, so that's something that I would like to add to my list, because that wasn't something that he ever got to do. Just add it to the list so that we can knock that out and go experience that for him. But that is hard. And, shared dreams doesn't even have to be something like a vacation. Shared dreams could be like an expectation of whenever you have children and watching your children grow up and experience the different milestones that a child experiences. So for my daughter, she was 7 when her dad died. So what he missed was her graduating elementary school, going to middle school, graduating middle school, going to high school. He missed the first boyfriend. He missed the first dance. He missed the first heartbreak. He missed graduation. He's going to miss her wedding. All these things compounds. Like, these are things that you expect when you marry someone and you have children, that you're going to experience these things together. And you can't. So these are your hopes and dreams and your expectations, and that part is very hard, and you don't always think about it, but then it just kind of smacks you in the face. Talking about your daily routine, that was probably one of the hard things for me initially, and a lot of people experience this as well. Your routine is typically based around each other, around your kids. One gets up, one makes coffee, one does breakfast. You get up, you get your shower. You kind of time everything around each other. And when they're not there, you have to reconfigure. And that in itself can just be devastating. I think about one of my friends who lost her husband. Her husband was a coffee drinker. She's a tea drinker. She would get up and she would make his lunch. She would make his coffee. She would do all these things so that whenever it was time for him to go, a kiss goodbye and off he went. And when he passed, she didn't have to make coffee anymore. She didn't have to get up early to make his lunch. She didn't have to make sure his laundry was done so that his uniform was ready for the next day. She didn't have to worry about those things. And some of you would be like, wow, man, that's nice, right? You don't have to, and no more stress. But for someone that was your routine, that was your way of showing your spouse that you love them, by making sure that everything was set up, everything was ready to go. And now you don't have to because they're not here. Like, that's a punch to the gut is what that is. But that, along with everything else, I mean, this is huge. This is why people struggle as much as they do with loss and their grief, and how compounded the grief is. Because just think about that. We've gone over 7 things already. We've talked about 7 things, and just think about them. They're just layered, and there's still more to go. And talking about daily routine, we also talk about traditions. We have holiday traditions, birthday traditions, anniversary traditions. We, as a society, like to celebrate different things. And those traditions, sometimes they end, sometimes they continue in their memory, but they will change. I usually tell people whenever they go through loss, like, the first year is the hardest. The second year is not as hard, but it's still hard because the numbness is worn off. And so whatever traditions you had, however you used to celebrate, that's the kick in the face. So I encourage people to be easy on themselves, but also, if there is a tradition that you took part of and someone that used to do that tradition with you is no longer here, try to reach out to the spouse or to reach out to the family and see, well, what are we going to do? Be an active part of that solution. Maybe it's, we continue this tradition, or let's do something a little different, or maybe we can do something else, or, let's skip it this year, but let's do it next year. Being mindful of the impact that the loss has. It's going to have an impact on you, but it's also impacting the family that's left over. So just be mindful about what that looks like and how it can be preserved. Is it worth preserving? Or is it time to start a new tradition? I can say for us, that was something that we did. We just started new traditions. We kept some of the old ones, but we also started new traditions as well, because sometimes the old ones are just too painful. And I think that's something that people struggle with accepting, is that if someone passes away, the family doesn't want to continue the tradition. And, so I can relate this to a lot of people. We all would get together. We would go to my grandmother's house. We would have dinner. We'd all spend time together. And then you grow up and you move away. And so visits don't happen as frequently, but they still continue. Grandma passes away. The family doesn't necessarily continue the traditions. Like, sometimes they'll try to keep them going. But as the time goes by, the tradition either morphs and changes into something else, or it just stops completely. So it depends on what it is, but just being aware of the impact that grief has on those activities and on the person, and whether or not they choose to continue to enjoy those things or not. Another thing for a spouse we talked about that I mentioned earlier was financial security. People make really big assumptions about a person's financial situation, and sometimes they can be misled based on what they see, not knowing what's actually happening. But financial security is huge. I know I talk a lot about life insurance and making sure that you have things squared away, your will, your benefits, all those things, getting that taken care of. But there are a lot of people that do not have their financial affairs in order. And assuming that there's going to be a life insurance payout, and assuming that a widow is going to be rolling around like Scrooge McDuck in his pit of gold coins, that doesn't happen. That's not real life. It does happen for some people, but I would say that is probably the exception, not the rule. The other thing is, think about this. When you have someone, the two of you are working together, you're putting your finances together, you're paying for things together, and it might not always be easy, but at least there's two options coming in that are helping towards the greater good of the group. And when your person dies, you lose that help You lose that second piece flowing in. And there is a lot of insecurity when it comes to money. And let me tell you, there's so many assumptions. Oh, well, the kids will get Social Security. Yeah, as long as the parent paid in. But if you have a parent that dies that was being paid under the table, they don't get anything. Or if they didn't have enough years of work, Social Security is not really going to be much of a benefit. So just being mindful and aware that it's not always what we think it is. There's not always going to be a will or a life insurance payout. There's not always going to be a financial cushion that they're going to be able to fall into. That's definitely not the norm for a lot of people. And then we did talk about future plans a little bit, shared dreams. It's kind of the same thing, but your identity. And I kind of mentioned this before with confidence and vulnerability, but your identity has changed. Whenever your spouse dies, you were a spouse, you were a wife, you were a lover, you were a best friend, you were a caregiver, you were all of these things. And now that's all past tense. Like, I was a wife. I was, or, some people say, well, I am still the wife. So it's who you are and how you're defined. I think the biggest thing for a woman especially is going from Mrs. to Ms. That's a big one. That's a really, really hard one. And a lot of widows struggle with that, trying to decide if they're going to keep Mrs. or if they're going to go to Ms. And that seems so minor, but I can tell you that's a big deal. That is a really big deal for a lot of women, especially. And also deciding if they're going to keep their late husband's name or not. If they're going to change it to something else or whatever. And not only that, but also going from the titling of married to widow, checking boxes whenever you have to identify your relationship status. Again, this doesn't seem like it's really that big of a deal. Like, you check these boxes all the time, don't think twice about it. But whenever you have to check the box for the first time that says widowed, that's like a knife to the heart. And I think the worst thing in my experience, especially when right after my husband passed, the worst thing was going to the doctor's office and filling the paperwork back out and needing to figure out who your emergency contact is. I don't even know. You have a kid in school, they start the next school year, and you have to fill out the paperwork, and it wants to know mom's information, and it wants to know dad's information, and dad's deceased or mom's deceased, and you have to write it out, and you have to, it's just, the hits keep coming. It's horrible. So, but it's information that's needed. It's necessary. So we get that. But anyway, so I just think it's important for people to understand and to recognize that there's so much more to death, and there's so much more to grief. And, from a widow's perspective, this is so, so true. The secondary losses and even the tertiary losses that come with death that you don't know. But if you listen to me, you listen to this podcast, this episode in particular, And it makes you, I think, a more sympathetic person, because you can sympathize with people and you can at least know that this is a thing and that this is possibly what they're going through. And you can be aware. Awareness is huge. Acknowledging that this might be what's actually happening with someone is huge. And it can make all the difference in the world. So with that, I'll leave you. Thank you so much for being here today. If this resonated with you, please share this with somebody that you think could learn something from this, or maybe that you had a conversation and this is right up that same alley. Please share this episode with them. Share the podcast. Let's get it out there so people can hear it, so they can learn all about it. And as you know, death is inevitable. Chaos is optional. Until next time, I'll see you next week on the Flip Side of Death podcast.